You cannot go in the pool unless you wait 90 minutes after you just had a meal. Show of hands if your parents told you that when you were kids and you totally believed it, even though it makes no sense whatsoever. Anybody with me on that? Anybody hear that growing up? Okay, glad I'm not the only one. How's this for another example of things that your parents told you when you were a kid that sounded normal, but the older you get, the more you think about it, the more questions you have. Here's another example of one of those. If you swallow your gum, it'll take 7 years to digest in your stomach. Anybody hear that one growing up? How about this one? If you eat the watermelon seeds, it'll grow in your stomach. Anybody? How about this one? You keep making that face, it's gonna be stuck that way for a long time. How about this one? It's bad for your eyes to read in the dark. Actually, I don't know if that one's true or not. Is that one true? Is it bad for our eyes? It's not true? Okay, good. You work for an optometrist, so you know. You can tell us for a fact that it's not true. How about, let me give you one more. And this is one of my favorite ones of all, okay? You cannot turn the light on in the car while you're driving because the driver will be blinded and they won't be able to see. Did anybody else grow up with this? This is a true story, no cap. 2 months ago, I was driving at night and my daughter Eden hit the light and I freaked out. Like I had a flashback moment. I was like, no! She's like, why? I'm like, because I won't be able to see. She's like, really? I'm like, yes. Maybe. Actually, not at all. But that's what my dad said whenever we were in the car. I want to read you guys a verse this morning that I think fits perfectly in the category of Bible verses that the first time you hear it, you're like, that sounds pretty normal. But the more you think about it, the more questions you have and the less it makes sense. If you are just joining us, we're working our way through the book of Philippians, and it's a book written by a guy named Paul. Paul used to hate Jesus and used to be against the church. Then he met Jesus, and his life was transformed. And I always love to say that just in case there are people in the room or watching online who are like, man, I am as far away from God as you can imagine. And I'm like, congratulations. The guy who wrote this letter spent a good amount of his life in the place that you were in, but then he met Jesus, and Jesus changed his life. And in the second chapter of this letter that he wrote one of those verses that's just like, what in the world are you talking about? Check it out. Philippians chapter 2, verse 14. Do everything, Paul says, without grumbling or arguing. Can't speak for anyone else in here, but the first time I heard that verse, I was like, yeah, that sounds normal. But then I thought about it. And I thought about it some more. And I'm like, I have some questions, right? I mean, the more I read it, the more I wonder to myself, did Paul get carried away in this part of the letter, right? I mean, I'm like, he had to have been, right? There's no way he meant this, because how in the world is the man's gonna ask grown men and women who are out here in the streets, in the real world, living our lives, to do everything without grumbling or arguing? Nothing? Nothing at all? Excuse me for a second. I'm going to go delete all the social media apps on my phone immediately. Because what's the point of Facebook if I can't grumble or argue? Amen, anybody? What's the point of Twitter if we're not going to complain or grumble or argue? Paul says, hey, fam, I would love it if you do everything without grumbling or arguing. Obviously, Paul didn't have Facebook in the first century when he wrote this. Obviously, Paul never had his favorite team in a game and the refs missed an obvious pass interference call that went against his team. Obviously, he was never in that situation, right? Obviously, Paul never got stuck in traffic on 475 while riding his camel home from work like I just got stuck last Friday. Anybody? Obviously, Paul never tried to get the spicy chicken sandwich from Popeyes on Secor. Obviously, Paul has never been unwillingly added to a text thread with an Android user, right? Obviously, Paul has never flown Spirit Airlines in his entire life to be able to write that verse. Obviously, Paul don't have kids. Come on now. Mom, 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 mom. Anybody got kids that call you 900 times every single hour? Right? How many of your parents love coming to church? One, because of Jesus, and two, because it's 90 minutes away from them gremlins. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah, like it's 90 minutes without somebody in your face saying, mom, mom, dad, 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 dad. Obviously, I know your kids, so you're saying that a little too loud. Paul says, I want you to do everything without grumbling or arguing. When I first read this, I do that thing that I always do when I read verses that I don't really like. I'm like, let me check it out in another translation, you know? Maybe it'll say it a little bit differently, right? And I check the NLT, and the NLT says, I want you to do everything without complaining or arguing. I'm like, thanks, that's not very helpful. You just took grumbling out and you put complaining in there, and that's even harder for me, right? Do everything, he says, without complaining or arguing. Which is ironic because that's all this verse makes me want to do. All right, anybody else feel that way? Thank you, Paul, for suggesting that I shouldn't complain or argue about anything, because you saying I shouldn't complain or argue about anything makes me want to complain and argue about how unreasonable it is that you are asking me not to complain or argue about anything. Do everything, he says, without complaining or arguing. Not most things. Not some things. Paul says, I want you to do everything. Question that I'm sure nobody in here is eager to answer this morning. If we took all of your social media footprints, i.e. comments, likes, retweets, even those things that you thought, the ones that you delete, and I'm talking, you know how you type a response and you delete it, and then you type it again and you delete it. If we took all of that and we put it in a pie chart, and we put it right up there on the screen and everybody could see, what percentage of it would you say would fall under the category? You know how they have the pie chart with a circle and you can do different colors? What percentage would fall under the category of complaining, arguing, or grumbling? 15%. That's pretty good. I was going more like the 80s. And for those of you who aren't on social media, because you're obviously better than the rest of us and you have more meaningful things to do, if we could have a voice memo, okay, of every conversation you've had in the last 6 weeks. So your spouse, your kids, your neighbors, your coworkers, that person at Starbucks, the movie theater person, the waiter, the conversations that you had with yourself when nobody else was there, you know those things you say under your breath that you're mumbling. If we could take all of that and we put that in a pie chart and we threw up on the screen, how much of that would fall under the category of what Paul is saying he doesn't want us to do? Probably going to read this verse about 50 times today just because I want you to get the book picture and to feel the way. Do everything he says. I want you to do everything without grumbling, without arguing, without complaining. Couple quick thoughts before we try to break down why in the world he says this and how to do this. Number one, I just want you to know that Paul is not trying to slow you down. Okay, so just in case you're like, oh man, you know, like another church person, not trying to get in, cramp my style. No. I don't know if you noticed, but the first two words in the verse say what? Do everything. That's great. So if you came in here like, man, I got big plans and big ambitions for my life. And Paul's like, dude, that's amazing. Do it. I don't care. Do it all. Do everything that you want to do. I'm not speaking to what you want to do. I'm speaking to how you do it. So go ahead and do whatever you want to do. But I just want you to try to do it without arguing or complaining. The second quick thing I want us to know is that Paul is not suggesting that we're not going to have hard conversations or conflict, or that we're not going to take positions that are controversial. And we know that because Paul does all of those things in this letter. Right? In Philippians alone, Paul takes a hard stand. Paul has conversations that are uncomfortable. Paul takes a lot of controversial positions in this letter. So we know that's not what he's saying. The third thing that we can eliminate from the list is that Paul is not trying to diminish our voice. So he's not like, go in the corner and shut up because you're a follower of Jesus Christ. That's not what he's saying. Paul is not trying to diminish your influence. If anything, don't miss this, Paul's doing the opposite. If anything, Paul's trying to tell you how to leverage your voice for the most impact. If anything, Paul is arguing here that one of the ways that you can actually make the biggest difference in the world is if you can take on a posture that is countercultural to the posture of the culture around you that seems to be stuck in the same loop of arguing, complaining, and grumbling. Same loop over and over and over. Anybody old enough in here? And I'm looking over there as I say this. I'm not going to name any names. But anybody old enough to remember when you needed a record player to listen to music? Anybody know what I'm talking about? I know vinyl is back now, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about back in the day where there was no MP3s or MP4s or MP whatever or CDs or DVDs or Blu-rays. The only way was a record player. You know what I'm talking about? Anybody? Only one person? Like you had to get the record. You know what I'm talking about? Right? Do you remember this? You're Rudy, you're smiling over there. What, do you remember? You still have one? You have a record player? Anybody still own not like the retro one, like the legit Jake, that's amazing. Do you remember what records you had? Do you remember any of the records? A lot of Motown, my man. Tom, do you remember what records you had? Barely. Okay, anybody remember some classics? I can't see who's raising their hand. What you got? Oh, there you go. Give me another one. Anybody else? Bing Crosby. Jake, what you got? What'd you say? Beatles, right? I remember my dad had a bunch, but for some reason, I just remember a couple. I remember Michael Jackson. I remember we had that, right? And I remember we had The Sound of Music. Okay? I was going to say one of the greatest musicals of all time, but one of the greatest movies of all time. If you disagree, I will fight you. I'm serious. I will. Ask my wife. I am passionate. But we had The Sound of Music, and we would listen to it. It was amazing. And do you guys remember what would happen? You'd be listening to your favorite record, and what would happen? Tom, do you remember what would happen once in a while? You would listen to your record. It would skip, and what would happen? It would play the same thing over and over, right? You know, doe, a deer, a female deer. I'm rocking out Ray, a drop of golden 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 ray, a drop of golden. You know, and the first 50 times you kind of act like you can't hear it because you don't want to be the one to go up to fix the thing. And finally your dad or your mom's like, somebody, please. Right? It starts to skip and it's stuck in the same loop. Is it just me or does anyone else feel like our culture seems to be stuck in the same loop of arguments, complaining, and grumbling? Anybody else notice this? We're either arguing or we're complaining or we're grumbling about something. It doesn't matter if you're on Facebook or if you're on Twitter or on Instagram. We are arguing and we are complaining and we are grumbling. It doesn't matter if you're watching Fox News or CNN or your local TV station. We're arguing, we're complaining, and we're grumbling. Doesn't matter if you're at work or if you're at home or if you're at the mall. Somebody is arguing, somebody's complaining about something, and somebody is grumbling about something. It feels to me like so much of our culture, in person or virtual, is stuck in an endless loop of arguments, complaining, and grumbling. The same way that the Philippian church found themselves in a culture that was stuck in the same loop that we're stuck in. Now, obviously, in the first century, these guys that Paul was writing to had to be creative about how to voice their complaints and their arguments because they didn't have Facebook and they didn't have Twitter, right? I didn't have time to research this, so someone can tell me. I don't know if Tom had invented MySpace in the first century. I don't know if anybody know this or not, so I don't know if they had the MySpace outlet back in the day. What I do know, though, is that like us, it appears to me, based on this passage and some context, that these guys like us were stuck in the same loop. And what's fascinating about this verse is Paul doesn't just tell them, hey, I want you to do everything without arguing or complaining or grumbling. I love that after he says that, I don't know if you caught it or not, but there's a comma. All right, there's not a period, there's a comma, which means there's more to come. Listen to what he says. He says, do everything without grumbling or arguing. The other translation says complaining, comma. And then he says this. He says, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then he says, this is amazing, you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. Listen to what Eugene Peterson in the Message how he paraphrased that last part. He says, go into the world uncorrupted. This is amazing. A breath of fresh air in this squalid and polluted society. Provide people with a glimpse of good living and of the living God. A breath of fresh air in this squalid and polluted society. I don't even know what the word squalid really means, but I get the point he's making. Right? The point that he's making here, if you're not catching it, is that with something as simple as not complaining, arguing, or grumbling, you can literally disrupt the national narrative. Right? A lot of us are often looking for the super spiritual things that we can do to change the world. And Paul's like, that's amazing, but let me just give you one simple way. If you want to change the world and you want to change your community and you want to be a part of life-changing transformation wherever you are, let me give you a simple way to do that. You decide that you're not going to join the chorus of complaining, arguing, and grumbling. Can you do that? If you do that, Paul says, you will shine like stars. And I don't know how many people in the room here, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, or unchurched, or you'd consider yourself not a Christian. But if there were ever a part of the sermon where you say amen, or where you're online and you give the hands up emoji, it would be this moment. Because you get this more than church people get this. You get this more than followers of Jesus get this. Right? You get that what the world needs, and what our world is looking for, and what the world will find refreshing and irresistible is not more and more followers of Jesus Christ who are going to join the chorus of complaining and arguing and grumbling about everything. No, what the world needs and what the world is looking for and what the world will find refreshing is followers of Jesus Christ who, through the grace of God, have reframed their view of the world in such a way that they can literally do what Paul is saying here, that they can do everything they're planning on doing, but they're going to do it in a posture of not complaining, not arguing, and not grumbling. That's what the world needs, and that's what the world is going to find refreshing. Do everything, Paul says, without arguing or complaining, and you sit back and see how you will shine in the world. Let me read this to you in the NASB. It's the new Sammy Adeby paraphrase. If you've never heard of it, 1999. And I'll just text you whatever you want to hear if you think the verse means whatever it means. I don't even know what that means, but that's the point. Do everything with a heart of gratitude. That's another way to look at that verse. Do everything you do with a heart full of gratitude. And here's why. Don't miss this. Here's why. Because the only way that I found to be able to cure a heart that is infected and diseased with complaining and arguing and grumbling is to literally inject it with as much gratitude as possible. Simply put, the antidote, I believe, to a heart that's corrupted. And I know that sounds extreme, but you need to feel the weight of this. Because a lot of us think, so what? I grumble about a couple things. So yeah, I'm a complainer. I mean, we don't really say that. But if we're going to say it, if we're going to be honest, we usually will undermine our complaining and our arguing and our grumbling. And Paul is saying, hey, no, this is a huge deal. Right? And what I'm hoping that you'll see this morning is that the only way to cure that is to fill our hearts with gratitude. In other words, the more aware you are of God's grace in your life, i.e., the more aware you are of all the things that you have been given that you don't deserve, the less things you'll have to complain and grumble about. In other words, Show me a man or a woman who has a long list of things to complain and grumble and argue about. And I will show you a man or a woman who has either never known or has lost sight of how much they have been given that they do not deserve. And I know this sounds like, yeah, that's exactly what I would expect a pastor to say, but could it be, fam? Could it be? Could it be that we have put the wrong person on the stand? Right? Could it be that this whole time that you and I have been collecting evidence against society at large and against the people around us, the real culprit is the person that's staring us in the mirror? Right? Could it be that the reason a lot of us have a lot to complain about and a lot to grumble about and a lot to argue about is far less about what's happening around us and far more about what's happening inside of us? Could it be that Jesus was onto something when he said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks? Right? I mean, could it be, you guys, that what's happening, what comes out of our mouth, is nothing more than an amplification of the entitlement that's in our heart? I was driving in this morning thinking about this, and I was thinking about the show, and I've never really watched it, but I've just kind of skipped through it. But there's a show, I don't know if it's still on. You know the show where people didn't realize that they're pregnant, and then they just have a baby? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Right? You guys know? Okay, good. I was glad. I didn't know I was pregnant. Is that what it's called? Okay, here, it's called I Didn't Know I Was Pregnant. Because they didn't know they were pregnant. They had a baby. And it sounds a little bit weird, I know. But could it be that so many of us, myself included, have been carrying entitlement in our hearts for so long that we have no choice but to birth complaining, arguing, and grumbling? Could it be that so much of our complaints is nothing more than the love child, if you will, of our pride and entitlement? Is it possible, fam, that all of our complaints have far, 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 far more to do with a heart that's entitled, far more than we would love to admit? Do you guys mind if I bring this home? You sure? Because I'm not talking home like Toledo or 2020, 21 home. I'm talking home like your living room, like your bedroom, like this is about to get uncomfortable home. How much of our complaints and entitlement and grumbling, and I know that you're passionate and you got a conviction, I get all of that, but how much of that, if we're honest, is because our hearts is filled with entitlement? For example, we feel entitled as Americans. So the moment something doesn't go the way we think it ought to go politically, man, we got so much to complain about, and we got so much to grumble about, and we got so much to argue about. We feel entitled as employees. So the moment my boss doesn't treat me the way I deserve to be treated, the way I'm entitled to be treated, man, I'm going to be rolling my eyes, and I'm on Monster.com looking for another job. We feel entitled as friends. So the moment my friend falls short or doesn't treat me the way I think I ought to be treated, guess what? I'm out of here. We feel entitled as church members. Uh-oh. So the moment pastor don't do what I think pastor should do, I'm out of here. We feel entitled to be treated a certain way as a husband or as a wife. So the moment my spouse doesn't do the thing that I think I deserve to get because, I'm a spouse and this is what I'm entitled to, it's World War II. We feel entitled to be treated a certain way every time we go to a restaurant to eat. And so we go home and we leave the worst reviews possible the moment the waiter makes a simple mistake. And yes, I know that there are layers to this conversation. I know it requires a lot of nuance. I know that there are exceptions to the rule. But come on now, church. I think if most of us are honest at the root, and that's what I'm getting at this morning, of our complaints and arguments is a spirit of entitlement. That we feel like we deserve fill in the blank. And the great irony about it, when you listen to a lot of us talk, what's so ironic, and this is not in all cases, but in most cases, what's so ironic is that the things that we are complaining about and grumbling about in this season are the same things that we begged God for in a previous season. Not going to ask for a show of hands, but I wonder how many of us in here are introspective and self-aware enough to realize that so many of the things that we're complaining and grumbling about and arguing about are things we begged God for, things that other people in the room would give anything to have. Man, I'm telling you, we're just going to go there since we're already here, right? I mean, it's been so fascinating. I've been through like many cycles, left and right, in the middle. It's been so fascinating as an immigrant for a third world country to just sit back and just watch a lot of Americans respond to the political climate in our day, right? On both sides. It's so fascinating to me. Right? And I can't tell you how many times, and I get it, there are real issues to be talked about. There are real things for us to wrestle around. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I'm not saying, like I said earlier, that Paul is asking us to be passive. But I can't tell you how many times I've sat back and listened to people on both sides talk, and I just want to call a timeout and step in the middle and go, guys, I just need you to understand something. I'm not going to convince you. I'm not even sure what you're arguing about, but I just need you to know that there are so many people in the world, a lot of them I grew up with, who would give anything, literally, they will risk their lives to live in the country that you live in. Like literally, like do you understand that? I'm not saying that changes your conviction. I'm saying it changes your posture. I'm saying that it is possible for us to stand for our convictions without coming from a posture of entitlement. And I wonder how many of us realize that I am complaining and grumbling about things that so many people would give an arm and a leg to have. I wonder how many of us realize that we're complaining about things that we begged God for. Do you remember when you didn't have the job that you're grumbling about right now? And you're like, I'll do anything, God. Do you remember what it was like when you were single? And you're like, I'll take anybody. Maybe not anybody, God, but I'll take anybody. And now you're like, I don't believe I'm being treated this way. Remember when you do anything to have friends, to be a part of a church, to be able to go to a restaurant and pay for it? Do you remember what it was like when you begged God, when you dreamed of your current reality today? That you remember what it was like before you had those kids that call you 500 times a day? And you're like, God, I will do anything. Sammy, do you remember what it was like when you would preach to your bedroom furniture? I've shared this many times, and every time I share it, I think people think I'm exaggerating. I'm telling you, I'm pretty sure my first 100 sermons were to my bedroom furniture on Scottwood Avenue in the Old West End. Right, for the first time in my life, 20-something years ago, I knew that God gave me a gift. I knew that I would open the Bible and the words would just come out. And this was before laptops and iPads and all this stuff. And I would take my pen and I would just start writing. Like I couldn't keep up with the words. And I remember I'm like, I got to preach this or something. I don't have a platform. I don't have a microphone. I don't have a stage. And so I would sit in my bedroom and I would preach to my furniture. I would imagine that my furniture were people and I would preach the gospel to them. And I'll never forget my buddy Tim invited me to come mow lawns with him. I'm like, oh man, I'm moving on up now. Now I'm preaching to the grass. Like I'm like, this is amazing. And this is a true story. I can still picture it. One day we're mowing. We're on the south end. And this guy's yard had land gnomes. And I was like, whoa, this is next level. I'm like, we're here for 45 minutes. You guys are going to get saved before I'm done mowing. Dude, you're laughing, but I'm serious. Now, I'm going like, hear the word of the Lord. I am praying. I'm prophesying. I'm bringing out my best sermon, right? And they're just looking at me like nothing. I'm like, I don't care. I got to get this word out. I mean, there literally was a time in my life where I could not imagine doing what I'm doing now to actual people. Fast forward 20-something years, and sometimes I sit in the front here and I look back, like, there's not a lot of people in the theater. I don't know if I can do this today. What is that? Why is that? Fam, what is it about us that causes us to lose perspective? What happens in my heart that I can go from preaching to landowners and preaching to furniture? And now I'm sitting here going, man, I don't know, man. It's not a lot. There's not enough people in the room. Now, I don't know if I can speak to a camera and people are streaming on the outside. What is it that causes that to happen in our heart, that causes us to be entitled the moment God gives us the things that we begged him for? Now, please don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you don't deserve love or respect, because you do, because you were created in the image of God. You deserve all of that. I'm not saying that you need to stay in situations that are unhealthy. Okay, I'm not saying stay in a job or a relationship that's unhealthy. No, you should not. Jesus didn't stay in unhealthy situations. Jesus walked away from ministry many times. Luke 5:16, I believe, says that. So that's not this conversation. Don't hear what I'm not saying. What I am saying, however, is that I want you to consider what it looks like for you to live your convictions in a posture that doesn't require you and I to argue, complain, or grumble. I'm not saying you don't have convictions. You can have convictions and opinions. You can have convictions about immigration and masks and politics, baby wise, baby shark, whatever you want to have an opinion about, you can. This is not an anti-opinion message. This is an anti-complaining, grumbling, and arguing message. Because that posture, for the most part, diminishes the very message that we are passionate about. What I'm suggesting this morning is that every time we feel that need to just, you know what I'm talking about when that thing comes. I mean, I feel this all the time. I love arguing. I was on the debate team. It's like one of my spiritual gifts is to argue with people. And so when I'm reading this, I'm like, man, this is a little bit too close to home. But every time we feel that thing inside of us, I'm just asking you to call a timeout and just to do a little bit of a heart check. And to just ask yourself, is it possible for me to live out my convictions without complaining, arguing, or grumbling? Or to put it a different way, is it possible for me to walk in this path and to do what I want to do from a heart of gratitude? The next time you feel yourself getting riled up, I want you to consider, especially if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, that you are following in the footsteps behind a Savior, a Messiah, who changed the entire world. And he did it without complaining or grumbling. Even though if anybody was justified to argue, complain, and grumble, it would be Jesus. I don't know if you remember what Paul says, but listen to how Paul put it earlier in chapter 2 in verse 5. This is amazing. Listen to what he says. We're just going to go a little bit of a throwback. If you missed this conversation, go listen to it. But listen to what Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5. Talking to you and I. This is what sets up Paul saying don't argue, grumble, or complain. Listen to what he says in verse 5. He says, in your relationship with one another, Paul says, I want you to have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, he was God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. What Paul is saying here, real quick, before I read the rest of the verses, Paul is saying, hey, Jesus didn't do what I would have done if I were Jesus. Right? Jesus didn't walk around going, wrong, wrong, dumb, stupid. Are you kidding me? Woof, security. Right? He didn't do any of that. Right? I mean, is that fascinating to anybody else? I mean, there's so many things I love about Jesus, but I love this about Jesus. Right? I love that the one guy that could have walked around town going, wrong, 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 not even close, so close yet so far away. The one guy that could have done that did none of that. The one guy that could have justified complaining about everything and about everyone did not do that. The one guy that could have done all the things that most of us are guilty of doing. Not only did he not do that, but he didn't even feel the pressure to share his opinion about everything. Do you mind if I just get off this exit for just a quick second? Just in case you missed the memo. I don't know what this is for. Maybe a lot of us. You don't have to share your opinion about everything. It doesn't matter. You can clap for that. Come on now. I'm going to say it again for those in the back and for those online. You don't have to share your opinion about most things. Did you know that Jesus didn't share his opinion about most things, even though he was right? Did you know this? And did you know that there are so many things that Jesus chose not to say by choice? It's fascinating. There's so many times in the Bible where the religious leaders would bait him and they would ask a question and he would walk away. And there's so many times where he would tell a parable and people didn't get it. And he's like, all right. And he would just move on. Isn't that weird to anybody else? And there were so many times where people came to the wrong conclusions. Come on, somebody needs to hear that. People came to the wrong conclusions about Jesus, and he didn't feel the need to clarify. Jesus wasn't like, hey, hold on now. Let me explain what's going on. I know you saw me over there. I know you thought you heard me say this, but I just want to make sure that you understand. Hold on now, man. I know that's what you think about this. I just want to make sure I let you know what God. Hold on. No. Jesus spoke truth more than any other human, and his truth offended people. But make no mistake about it. Jesus did not feel the pressure to share his opinion about everything. And as followers of Jesus Christ, I'm challenging us this morning to follow in that example. What would it look like for us to take the posture where we not only are not entitled and we not only are filled with gratitude, but we're humble. That we can walk around going, there are things that are fire inside of me, but I don't have to say it. I don't have, just because someone gives me a mic and a platform, don't mean I have to say what I think about everything. Just because I have Facebook don't mean I got to respond to everything. I got to comment on everything. I got to say something about everything. Paul says, have the same attitude as Jesus. He was God. He didn't consider equality with God something to be used. And when he had a chance to power up, he didn't power up. Listen to what he says. He says, rather, Jesus made himself nothing. He took the very nature of a superhero. No. He took the very nature of a supreme being. No, he didn't go Hulk smash. That's what I would have done. I'd be like, oh man, I know all you see is Bruce Banner, but welcome to the green, big, angry guy that can squash all of you. No, he says Jesus took the nature. That was his posture. The one guy who knew everything right and could read everyone's thought and knew what was justified before God took the nature of a servant. He came into every conversation saying, how can I serve you? I am the least in the room. That's what Paul is saying here. And I was reading the other day, it's so fascinating that the Bible teaches, this is mind-blowing. I think it's John chapter 15, that before Jesus went to the cross, are you ready for this? The Bible says that he washed the feet of his disciples. You know who was in the room? Judas. The man's finna betray Jesus within a matter of days. And Jesus knew. And Jesus still washed his feet. You know what I would have done? I would have either skipped, just wash, skip. And he's like, what about me? I'm like, you know why. You want me to get your business out, or you want us to, you know why, brah. That, or I would have washed his feet and broken every one of his toes. You think I don't know what you're doing, Snap? You've been stealing money. No one else does, but I know, Snap. And you think you're sneaky? I know you got a burner phone. You've been texting the Pharisees, and they're going to come get me here soon. Snap. Break every one of his toes. Heal it so I can break him again. Yo, he stabbed. I mean, for 3 years, Jesus walked with him and served him. And he betrayed him just like that for money. And Jesus knew that. And he still washed his feet. And he washed the feet of Peter. And he washed the feet of all the people that he knew were moments away from turning their back on him and denying they ever knew him. Crucify him, they said. Crucify him. Can you imagine what it was like for Jesus after 3 years of giving yourself and pouring yourself and serving people and providing for people and teaching people and healing people and filling the gap and loving people and listening to people and touching people that nobody wanted to touch? And now the collective chorus of the crowd was crucify him. If there was any moment where Jesus was justified to pull rank, it would be right there. If there was any moment where it was justifiable for Jesus to snap his fingers and the angels roll on down from heaven to take care of business, it would be right there. But no, what does Jesus say? When the whole crowd says, crucify him, what does he say? He says, Father, forgive. He wasn't complaining. He wasn't grumbling. It was like, oh, you people, you ungrateful sons. No. He said, God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I heard a preacher, I think it was Bishop T.D. Jakes, I don't remember exactly, preaching on this a couple months ago. And he said something that blew my mind. I'd never thought about this before. He said, when Jesus was at the cross, eyewitness accounts tell us that it was his mom and John. So he's at the cross. Everybody else bailed. Mama, because that's how mamas roll. They're with you till the grave. They don't care how many people are against you. They're there. And John was there. And I heard the preacher say this. Where was everybody else? Where was the leper that nobody would touch that Jesus touched? Where was the woman at the well? Where were all the people that she got from her town? They say, now we believe not just because you said it, because we've heard it by ourselves. Where was the blind guy that couldn't see and Jesus spat in the mud and put the thing on his eyes and all of a sudden he could see and his life was transformed? Where was the woman with the issue of blood that touched the cloak of Jesus and her life was transformed? Where were the 5,000 people that he fed? Where was the centurion who was like, I know that you can heal my child? And Jesus did. Where were all those people? Isn't that crazy that at the cross, we can only find 2 of you? Where are they? Where's Lazarus? Bro, you were dead in the grave. They had your funeral. Everybody went home. Jesus rolled into town, and you came out the grave. Where was Lazarus? Now, the Bible doesn't tell us, so we don't know where all those people are. We don't know what the circumstances are or why they were there. Here's what I know, though. I know why I'm not there. I know why, I can't speak for you, but I know why I probably wouldn't have been there. Like a lot of those other people. Because I'm forgetful. Because it's so easy to lose perspective. Because it's so easy to go from, wow, we have never seen anything like this before. There's no one like him. To now I feel entitled. And now I am joining the chorus of the cultural narrative. Now my voice has been drowned out by the voice of everyone in around me. It's so easy to forget that I've been given so much that I don't deserve. It's so easy to forget that the things that bug me right now are a blessing from God. It's so easy to forget how good and faithful God has been in my life. It's so easy to walk around with a swag, not realizing that but for the grace of God, but for the mercy of Jesus, but for God deciding that he would not treat me like I deserve. It's so easy to forget that the only reason I'm here is because I didn't get what I deserve, and I got everything that Jesus deserved. It's so easy for me to walk around feeling entitled to all of my opinions, as opposed to feeling indebted to the Savior who gave me his life. Show me a man or a woman whose heart is filled with gratitude and whose blood vessels are pumping from, man, I got so much I don't deserve, and I'll show you a man or a woman who has very little to complain and grumble about. Or better yet, you show me a community of people whose hearts are overflowing with gratitude, who walk in every room going, I don't believe I get to be here and I get to do this. It's only by the grace of God. And I will show you a community of people who shine like stars in today's culture. Do everything Paul says without arguing, grumbling, or complaining. Take on the nature of Jesus and be a servant.